There are two types of tests that are commonly performed for web applications: unit tests and end-to-end tests. We've seen unit tests in Module 3 and 4 when we unit tested our API, and we'll be creating more unit tests for our front-end components in Module 9. In this module, though, we'll be creating end-to-end tests for our full-stack app. Let's first talk about how end-to-end tests work and discover the difference between these and unit tests. That way we'll have a better idea of what we can accomplish with our end-to-end tests. Firstly, let's define unit testing again so that we have a basis for comparison. So the idea of a unit in testing is a breakdown of the code into small, easily testable parts. End-to-end testing, on the other hand, is a type of functional test that lies on the other end of the spectrum. Rather than testing units, we test the complete integrated application. For example, we may write an end-to-end test to test our registration process. The functionality behind this process is not fully represented by either the front end or back end alone. It requires both to work together. The other important difference with end-to-end testing is that it interacts with our application via the user interface, not the source code. So a typical end-to-end test will navigate to the app in a browser and then programmatically click on buttons, fill out forms, etc., and then make assertions about the page state. To perform end-to-end tests, you'll need a particular software stack. Starting from the bottom, the first piece of software that you'll require is a web browser. Next, you'll need a browser automation driver. This is required because end-to-end tests don't use the regular browser APIs that we commonly use in app development and script with JavaScript. Browser vendors also provide automation APIs with a lot of low-level functionality that the browser automation drivers will abstract for us. Finally, we need a test framework to run the end-to-end tests we write. The test framework will interface with the browser automation driver to execute and evaluate those tests. In this course, we'll be using the Chrome browser for our tests. You can use regular Chrome for end-to-end testing, but if you're using a remote server or development environment like Vagrant, it's better to use headless Chrome without the overhead of a graphical user interface. The browser automation driver we'll be using is Selenium, which is the most common one available, and the testing framework we'll use is Nightwatch, which we'll be discussing in more detail shortly. The last questions to address are what aspects of our app should be unit tested, and what aspects should be end-to-end tested, and why do we even need both? The best way to answer these is to firstly understand that both unit testing and end-to-end testing have unique strengths and weaknesses. The pros of unit tests is that they run fast and they're precise, allowing us to pinpoint issues in the code right down to a specific function. But the downsides of unit tests is that in large applications particularly, it's time-consuming to write unit tests for every part of the code. And not only that, but even if the unit test suite passes, it doesn't tell us if the application actually works in the hands of users. Well, what about end-to-end tests? What are their strengths and weaknesses? The first main strength of end-to-end testing is it allows us to implicitly test a lot of functionality all at once. And a passing end-to-end test suite usually means we have a working application, which is the main goal of web development. End-to-end tests have weaknesses too, though. Firstly, they're usually slow to run. Since you have to boot the whole application on a server and then in a browser to test it, it commonly takes 5 or 10 minutes for an end-to-end test suite to run. Also, end-to-end tests can be brittle. An inconsequential change, like changing a class on an HTML tag, can bring down the entire suite. And finally, end-to-end tests won't pinpoint the cause of a failure. You'll know, for example, that the login process doesn't work, but you probably won't know whether it's a problem in the front end or the back end, let alone which specific part of the code contains the bug. With the pros and cons of unit and end-to-end testing now understood, hopefully it's clear why the best plan is to use some of both. There's an optimal combination where the weakness of one type of testing will mostly be nullified by the strength of the other, giving you a fair amount of certainty that your app is working without overburdening your QA developers, and at the same time allowing you to quickly pinpoint and eliminate any bugs that arise. So that's all the theory we're going to cover. In the next video, we're going to start setting up end-to-end test suites for PrintBay.